You're sitting in a coffee shop. Your friend asks, "Where are you?" You want to answer, but suddenly you panic. Is it, "I'm in the coffee shop," or "I'm at the coffee shop"? Both sound right. Neither sound right.
This is the prepositional nightmare that haunts English learners everywhere. You think you know the role, then you encounter an exception, then another exception, then you give up.
But what if I told you that prepositions aren't random? They follow patterns. They make sense.
And once you understand the patterns, English suddenly becomes less confusing and way more fun.
Welcome to Talk, Learn, Teach. Today, we're solving the preposition mystery together.
Hey everyone, I'm Jordan, and I'm here with Lexi, who has this amazing ability to make confusing grammar concepts feel incredibly simple. Seriously, I've seen her explain prepositions to people and watch their faces light up.
That's so sweet. But honestly, prepositions made me want to tear my hair out when I was learning English. I was the person sitting in a coffee shop, completely confused about whether I was in it or at it.
What changed?
I realized that prepositions aren't trying to be confusing. They're actually very logical once you understand the reasoning behind them. They're about relationships, spatial relationships, temporal relationships, abstract relationships. And once I saw prepositions that way, everything clicked.
That's the approach we're going to take today. Before we do, though, we want to ask our community something. If you've struggled with prepositions, if you've made mistakes that embarrassed you, if you felt like prepositions are the one thing you'll never understand, this episode is your moment. Subscribe to Talk, Learn, Teach because we're breaking down English grammar in a way that actually makes sense.
And share this with someone who's been stuck on prepositions, someone who keeps making the same mistakes, someone who says things like, "I want to go to home," instead of saying, "I want to go home." Send them this episode. Tell them their confusion ends today.
Because honestly, prepositions are one of those topics where a small shift in understanding changes everything.
So let's dive in. Jordan, before we talk about the rules, I want to ask, what was your biggest preposition nightmare?
Oh man, I remember my first English job interview. The interviewer asked, "What are you interested in?" And I froze, because in my language, the equivalent doesn't use a preposition at all, or it uses a different one. I panicked and said, "I'm interested on technology." Completely wrong.
I understand. And what did the interviewer do?
She politely corrected me, but I felt so embarrassed. I thought I knew English. I had studied for years, but that one small preposition destroyed my confidence in that entire interview.
That's such a relatable moment because prepositions are deceptively complex. They look simple, just small words, but they're where English learners trip up constantly.
Why are they so hard?
I think it's because prepositions are largely idiomatic, meaning there's not always a logical reason why you say interested in instead of interested on or interested about. It's just how English works.
So you have to memorize them?
Not exactly. There are patterns, definitely patterns, but you also have to accept that some prepositions don't follow those patterns, and that's where people get frustrated.
I remember another moment I was at a restaurant. Wait, see, that's a preposition right there. At a restaurant. I said in a restaurant and someone corrected me. And I thought, what's the difference? Both have walls, both contain me.
That's actually such a good example because there is a difference, and that's what we're going to explain today.
Please, I need to understand this.
Okay, so here's the thing. With places, you use in for larger and closed spaces, like in a city, in a country, in a building. But you use at for specific points or locations, like at a restaurant, at a bus stop, at the beach.
Oh, so it's about the spatial relationship, whether you're inside something, at a point, or on top of something.
Exactly. And once you realize that prepositions describe relationships, not just random word choice, everything becomes logical.
That's why people have breakthroughs with prepositions. It's not about memorizing. It's about understanding the relationship being described.
And that understanding is what we're going to build today.
So let's organize this. Are there different types of prepositions?
Yes, and I think this is where a lot of English learning goes wrong. People try to memorize all prepositions as one big list, but it's so much easier if you categorize them.
How would you categorize them?
There are essentially three main categories: prepositions of place, prepositions of time, and prepositions of relationship or direction. And each category has its own logic.
Let's start with place, because that seems to be where most confusion happens.
Right. So prepositions of place describe where something is located, and they have a clear logic based on the spatial relationship.
Give me examples.
In is inside something, at is a specific point, on is on the surface of something, under is below something, above is higher than something, between is in the middle of two things, behind is at the back, in front of is at the front.
Okay, those make sense, but what about something like across or along or through?
Great questions. Across means from one side to another, like I walked across the street. Along means moving beside something in a continuous direction. I walked along the beach. Through means from one end to the other, passing through the space. I walked through the forest.
So these describe motion and direction, right?
Exactly. They show how something moves in relation to other objects. That's the whole point of prepositions of place. They're describing the spatial relationship.
What about time? Because I feel like prepositions of time are equally confusing.
Okay, so time prepositions are actually more straightforward than people think. You use in for months, years, seasons. In January, in 2020, in summer.
What about days?
Days use on Monday, on my birthday, on that day. You're specifying that single point in time.
And hours?
Hours use at 3 p.m., at midnight, at lunchtime, because you're pointing to a specific moment.
Oh, so the same logic applies. In for larger time periods, at for specific moments, and on for specific days.
Yes, once you see the pattern, time prepositions become so logical.
That's brilliant. And the third category, prepositions of relationship or direction?
These are prepositions that show relationships between things that aren't necessarily spatial, like by, with, for, about, during, without.
Give me an example.
I wrote the email by myself shows that I did something alone. I went with my friend shows companionship. I did this for you shows purpose or recipient. I'm worried about the exam shows the object of the emotion.
So these are more abstract relationships.
Right, they're describing connections between people, emotions, actions, intentions. They're harder to visualize, which is why people struggle with them, but they're still logical.
So if I remember these three categories and understand the reasoning, I can actually make sense of prepositions.
Absolutely. You'll still encounter exceptions, but you'll understand the framework, and exceptions are much easier to remember when you understand the framework.
Let's talk about actual mistakes people make, because I want learners to feel less alone in their confusion.
Oh yes, I've made all of these mistakes, and so has basically every English learner ever.
What's the most common one you see?
Probably go to home instead of go home. People add a preposition when they shouldn't.
Why do they do that?
Because in many languages, you'd say the equivalent of go to the home, but in English, home is special. It's so deeply understood as a destination that we drop the preposition. You just say go home.
What about arrive to versus arrive at?
Great example. You arrive at a place. I arrived at the airport. I arrived at your house, not arrive to.
Why?
Because at shows you've reached a specific point. You've arrived at that location. To suggests movement toward, but not necessarily arrival. So, I'm going to the store is correct, but I arrived to the store is wrong. You'd say, I arrived at the store.
What about listen? Because I feel like people get confused with that.
Oh, yes. You listen to something, not listen by itself with no preposition. I'm listening to music. Did you listen to the podcast? The preposition to is required with listen.
But you can say I'm listening without an object.
Yes, like if someone asks, Are you listening? And you're just listening in general, not to anything specific. But if there's an object, you need to.
What about wait and wait for?
Similar situation. You wait for something or someone. I'm waiting for my friend. We're waiting for the bus. Without the preposition, it feels incomplete.
And depend? I think people mess that up too.
Yes, you depend on something, not depend of or depend in. It's always on. It depends on the weather. You can depend on me.
These are such specific rules, though. How are people supposed to remember them?
Honestly, context. The more you see these phrases in context, the more natural they become. Reading helps, watching movies helps, listening to podcasts helps. Your brain absorbs these patterns.
So it's not about memorizing rules, it's about exposure to patterns.
Exactly. And once you understand that logic exists even in seemingly random prepositions, you feel less like you're just memorizing nonsense. There's a reason. You might not know the reason yet, but there is one.
I want to talk about some phrases that have prepositions that are so weird even native speakers have to think about them.
Oh, there are so many. Let me start with jealous of. Not jealous about, not jealous with, always of.
Why of? What's the logic?
It's showing that someone or something is the object of your jealousy. You're jealous of a person. You're jealous of their success. The of shows the target.
What about afraid? Is it afraid of or afraid about?
Good question. You're afraid of something. I'm afraid of spiders. I'm afraid of failure. But you're worried about something. I'm worried about the test. Same emotion in some ways, but different prepositions.
That's so confusing. Why?
Honestly, it's partly idiomatic. But I think afraid of suggests direct fear of a thing, the thing itself. Worried about suggests concern regarding a situation. It's more abstract.
What about excited? Is that excited for or excited about?
Both are actually correct. I'm excited for the concert. I'm excited about the concert. They're slightly different in nuance, but both work. Although excited about is more common.
That's one where people don't need to worry then.
Right. Some prepositions have flexibility. You're not always locked into one choice.
What about focus? Focus on or focus in?
Focus on. I need to focus on my studies, not focus in. The preposition on shows that your attention is directed toward that thing.
What about talk? Talk to or talk with?
Both are acceptable, but they're slightly different. Talk to can be more one-directional, like you're speaking at someone. Talk with sounds more collaborative, like a dialogue. So, I want to talk with you about something sounds more collaborative than I need to talk to you about something.
That's a beautiful distinction that I never knew about.
And this is why understanding prepositions is so empowering. You're not just learning rules, you're learning nuance. You're learning how to express exact shades of meaning in English.
So talk to might sound more directive or urgent, while talk with sounds more equal and collaborative.
Exactly. See, you're getting it. And once you understand these subtle differences, your English becomes incredibly sophisticated.
I want to talk about something that makes prepositions even more complicated: phrasal verbs.
Oh man, phrasal verbs are where English learners have actual nightmares.
What exactly is a phrasal verb?
A phrasal verb is a combination of a verb and a preposition or adverb that creates a completely new meaning, like give up. The verb give and the preposition up together mean to stop trying or to stop doing something.
But if you just know give and up, you wouldn't predict that combination means quit.
Exactly. That's why they're so difficult. You can't just understand the individual words, you have to understand the phrase as a unit.
Give me more examples.
Put up with means to tolerate. Look forward to means to be excited about something in the future. Get over means to recover from something. Run into means to encounter unexpectedly. Cut down on means to reduce.
That's so confusing. Why?
Honestly, it's partly idiomatic, but I think up suggests completion or improvement. Clean up means to make clean and complete. Speed up means to increase speed. Give up means to finish the attempt.
So it's not completely random.
No, once you understand some phrasal verb patterns, you can predict what many phrasal verbs mean. Down often means reduction or separation. Write down means to record. Breakdown means to separate or analyze. Slow down means to reduce speed.
That's actually quite logical when you look at it that way.
Right, and out often means completion or exposure. Find out means to discover. Sell out means to completely sell something. Burnout means to stop working or to become exhausted.
So if I understand these patterns, I can anticipate phrasal verbs I've never encountered before.
Absolutely. You might not get it exactly right, but you'll be close. And that's progress.
Talking about that, how many phrasal verbs are there?
Hundreds, maybe thousands. And that's why trying to memorize them individually is pointless. You need to understand the patterns and build from there.
So for learners listening, the strategy is to stop memorizing individual phrasal verbs and start learning the patterns.
Yes, and to accept that you'll encounter phrasal verbs you don't know. That's normal. Even native English speakers encounter phrasal verbs they've never heard. The point is to have a strategy for figuring them out.
Let's get practical. If someone is going to remember just a few rules about prepositions, what should those rules be?
Great question. I think there are 5 core rules that solve most preposition confusion.
Let's hear them.
Rule 1. For places, remember in, at, on. In for enclosed spaces you're inside of, at for specific points or destinations, on for surfaces.
Got it.
Rule 2. For time, use the same logic. In for months, years, seasons, on for days, at for specific times.
Those are easy to remember because they follow the same pattern.
Exactly. Rule 3. Some verbs require specific prepositions. You listen to, wait for, depend on, focus on. These are harder to remember, but you only need to know the most common ones.
How many is the most common ones?
I'd say maybe 20 to 30 verb-preposition combinations. Once you know those, you've covered like 90% of conversations.
That's very doable.
Rule 4. Pay attention to the emotional or relational meaning, not just the word. Worried about is different from afraid of. They're related but not identical. Understanding the nuance helps you choose the right preposition.
Nodding. And rule 5?
Rule 5. Accept that some prepositions are idiomatic. There's no logic. You just have to accept it and remember it. Interested in, bored with, tired of. These don't always make logical sense, but they're how English works.
And you're saying these 5 rules cover most preposition situations.
Yes,
I genuinely believe that if you understand these 5 rules, you'll handle 80 to 90% of prepositions correctly. The rest is just exposure and practice.
That's actually empowering because it means prepositions aren't this impossible thing. They're just a system.
They're absolutely a system, and systems can be learned.
So we've explained the rules. How does someone actually practice prepositions so it sticks?
Okay, so practice is key, and I have some strategies that actually work.
Tell me.
First strategy, create sentences about your own life using prepositions. Don't just read examples, create your own. I live in a city. I work at a company. I'm sitting on a chair. These are boring sentences, but they cement the pattern in your brain.
Why your own life?
Because it's meaningful. You care about your life, so you're more likely to remember sentences about your own reality.
Nodding. What's the second strategy?
Watch movies or TV shows with subtitles and specifically focus on prepositions. Don't watch passively. Watch for prepositions. Notice how they're used. Pause and write down interesting phrases.
So, active attention.
Exactly. Passive watching doesn't help, but active watching, specifically hunting for prepositions, changes everything.
What's strategy 3?
Keep a preposition notebook. Every time you encounter a preposition that confuses you or surprises you, write it down with context. She's good at dancing. I'm interested in art. He's tired of complaining. Over time, you'll see patterns emerging.
And that prevents you from making the same mistake twice.
Right, because you've written it down with context. Your brain sees it. You remember it.
Interesting. What about speaking practice?
Great question. Speak with a language partner and specifically ask them to correct your prepositions. Don't let it slide. If you say, I'm good on English, ask them, should that be good at English? Make them explain why.
So, conscious correction.
Yes, and explanation. Understanding makes it stick.
What's your final strategy?
Create scenarios and describe them using prepositions, like picture a coffee shop. Describe what you see using prepositions. The cup is on the table. The sugar is in the bowl. People are at the counter. The music is playing in the background. This forces you to think about spatial relationships and practice prepositions simultaneously.
So, you're building vocabulary and prepositions at the same time.
Exactly. You're not separating them, you're integrating them. And that's how language actually works.
I want to talk about something emotional. The moment when prepositions suddenly make sense, when the confusion lifts.
Ugh, I love talking about this because I've experienced it and I've witnessed it countless times.
Tell me about your breakthrough moment.
I was reading a book, in English, something I was still struggling with at the time, and I encountered the phrase, I'm overwhelmed with emotions, and something clicked. I realized overwhelmed with describes being flooded, saturated, covered in something. The preposition with made sense because emotions were surrounding me, covering me.
So you understood the logic behind the preposition choice.
Yes, and after that, I could predict prepositions better. I could say overwhelmed with work, overwhelmed with responsibility, and it made sense. The preposition described the relationship between me and the thing overwhelming me.
How did that change your English overall?
It changed everything because I realized I didn't need to memorize, I needed to understand relationships. And once I was looking for relationships instead of rules, prepositions became learnable.
That's beautiful, because you moved from seeing prepositions as arbitrary to seeing them as meaningful.
Exactly. And I think that's the breakthrough every English learner needs to have. Not why is it this way, but what relationship is this preposition showing?
Have you seen this breakthrough happen with other people?
Oh, so many times. I had a student who was stuck on phrasal verbs. She was trying to memorize them as a list. One day, I explained that put up with is actually about tolerating or bearing something. You're putting up with it, like you're holding it up, not letting it knock you down. And suddenly, she got it. She understood that the preposition contained meaning, not just grammar.
So the breakthrough isn't memorizing, it's understanding.
It's completely understanding. And once you have that understanding, prepositions stop being the enemy. They become tools for expressing exactly what you mean.
That's profound, actually, because prepositions are so specific. They're expressing the precise relationship between things.
And once you see them that way, they become beautiful, not frustrating. Beautiful.
Let's talk about where getting prepositions right actually matters in real life.
I think it matters most in speaking and writing when you're trying to sound professional or natural.
Give me an example.
Job interviews. If you say, I'm interested on marketing, you sound like someone learning English. If you say, I'm interested in marketing, you sound professional. It's the same person, same qualifications, but the preposition changes the perception.
So prepositions are part of how you're perceived as a speaker.
Absolutely. They're part of your credibility. People judge language ability by small things. Correct prepositions show attention to detail and study.
What about writing?
Writing is where prepositions are most important, because in writing there's a record. Someone reads it and thinks about it. A small preposition error becomes obvious.
Like emails?
Exactly. Professional emails with correct prepositions sound clear and confident. Emails with preposition errors sound uncertain or non-native.
That's a lot of pressure on these small words.
I know, but it's also freeing because it means that focusing on prepositions gives you a big return on your effort. Small improvement in prepositions creates a large improvement in perception.
So prepositions are the detail work that elevates your English from intermediate to advanced.
Yes, exactly. You can have great vocabulary and understand grammar, but if your prepositions are off, you don't quite sound right. But if your prepositions are correct, you sound polished.
That's actually really motivating because it means that focusing on prepositions is practical and valuable.
It is, and it's one of the things that separates people who learned English in a classroom from people who actually use English in real life.
As we wrap up today's deep dive into prepositions, I want to thank you for sticking with us. This is a complex topic, and you've stayed engaged.
If this episode has helped you understand prepositions better, if something clicked, if you finally understand why interested in and not interested on, please subscribe to Talk, Learn, Teach. This is how we know we're creating content that helps.
Hit that like button. Share this with someone who's been struggling, someone who's made preposition mistakes, someone who feels like prepositions are their biggest weakness in English.
And here's what I really want to ask. In the comments below, tell us about your preposition struggles. What prepositions confuse you most? What have you learned in this episode that shifted your understanding?
Or tell us about your breakthrough moment. If there was a time when prepositions suddenly clicked for you, we want to hear about it. We want to celebrate that moment with you.
Because breakthrough moments are what learning is about, and your breakthrough moment matters.
We'll be reading every single comment. We'll be responding. We'll be helping you work through any prepositions that still feel confusing.
Your English matters. Your effort matters. And the small things, like getting prepositions right, those matter too.
Thank you for investing in your English today. Thank you for being curious enough to understand prepositions instead of just memorizing them.
Keep practicing, keep creating sentences, keep noticing prepositions in the English you consume. That's how you master them.
We'll see you next time on Talk, Learn, Teach, where small words carry big meaning and understanding changes everything.
This is Talk, Learn, Teach. Now, go master those prepositions.